I thought I was just being polite, but I was the last person he ever talked to. I'm not antisocial or anything, I just like my space. I work from home, live in a quiet suburb, and keep a pretty low-key routine. Coffee around 7, some emails, a couple of meetings, maybe a walk if the weather's decent. My world is calm and self-contained, and I've worked hard to keep it that way. So when Mr. Fischer, my elderly neighbor from 2 doors down, started showing up more often, like clockwork, I didn't think much of it at first. I'd see him standing near the mailbox right when I happened to go check mine, or watering the same section of his front lawn every time I took the trash out. It was always followed by a, "Hey there," and some kind of small talk about the weather, or how loud the kids down the street were, or whether I thought gas prices were ever going to stop being ridiculous. At first, I told myself it was just coincidence. But then it started happening a little too often to be random. He wasn't pushy or anything, just always there. And always ready to talk. Like, really talk. I mean, I try to be polite. I was raised that way. But I've got work to do, deadlines, people waiting on me. And Mr. Fischer? He could stretch a casual greeting into a 20-minute conversation without breaking a sweat. I'd stand there, holding a bag of groceries or halfway to my car, while he went on about how the new mayor reminded him of a guy he used to know back in '68. I caught myself checking through the blinds a few times before going outside, just to make sure the coast was clear. I started thinking, okay, the guy's lonely. Probably doesn't have family around. That sucks, sure, but that doesn't mean I've got to be his daily entertainment, right? I've got my own life. Still, every time I cut a conversation short or mumbled some excuse about needing to get back inside, I'd feel this little sting of guilt. Not big, just enough to be annoying. One Saturday morning, I was heading to the car to run errands, keys in hand, when I heard his voice behind me. "Hey, you got a second?" I turned, trying not to visibly sigh. "Just wanted to show you something real quick. Out back, won't take more than a minute." I almost said no. I had a whole to-do list that day, and really didn't feel like getting sucked into another ramble about soil types or whatever. But I hesitated, and before I could come up with a reason, I heard myself saying, "Yeah, okay, for a minute." He led me through the side gate into his backyard, and it hit me right away how tired it looked. The lawn was patchy, flower beds overgrown, and the fence had clearly seen better days. But right in the middle was this small rose garden, kind of tucked away, and even though it was choked with weeds, you could tell it used to be beautiful. "Planted those with my wife," he said, motioning toward the mess of stems and faded blooms. "Used to be her pride and joy." I nodded, not sure what to say. He stood there for a second, just looking at them like he was seeing something that wasn't there anymore. Then he pointed at one of the bushes. "That one's Peace. Came from a clipping her aunt gave her when we first moved in." He smiled, kind of sadly. "Haven't done much with it lately, hard to keep up." I didn't ask what happened to his wife. I didn't need to. Something about the way he said "used to be" made it clear enough. I mumbled something like, "They're still holding on," which felt dumb as soon as I said it, but he just nodded like it meant something. After a few minutes, I said I had to get going, and he thanked me for stopping by, like I'd done him some big favor. The whole thing couldn't have been more than 10 minutes, but when I got back in the car, I sat there for a second, not starting it. I had this weird mix of feelings, irritation mostly, that my morning got hijacked again, but also something else. Not quite sadness, not quite guilt, just this tug in the gut. Like I'd looked through a tiny window into someone's life and then slammed it shut again, too fast. And yeah, I know it's not my job to fix anybody's loneliness. He's got neighbors, there's community centers, churches, but still, I couldn't shake this annoying little thought. What if I'm the only person he talks to this week? The worst part? I didn't want to care. I really didn't. I just wanted to get back to my day, my life, my schedule. But there I was, driving to the store, thinking about old rose bushes, and a man who stood in his yard like he was waiting for someone who hadn't shown up in a long time. And that night, when I was scrolling on my phone and saw a random article about aging in America, I stopped and read the whole thing, which is not something I usually do. I guess I just didn't like the feeling I had. That uncomfortable tension between knowing someone's hurting and not wanting to be the one who deals with it. It felt like being caught between two versions of myself, the one who wants to be kind and the one who just wants to be left alone. I didn't like either of them very much that night. A couple days later, I was coming back from a run, sweaty, earbuds still in, when Mr. Fischer waved me over from his driveway. I paused, halfway regretting taking my usual route, and he called out, "Hey, quick favor? Just a sec if you've got it." I was already halfway to the door, and honestly, I considered pretending I didn't hear him. But something about his tone. It wasn't his usual slow, chatty vibe. It sounded a little more, intentional? So I pulled out an earbud and walked over. "What's up?" I asked, trying not to sound too impatient. He motioned toward his garage. "Need a hand lifting something. Just a box. I can't quite bend the way I used to." I sighed internally, but nodded. "Yeah, sure." The garage door creaked as he opened it, and inside was this dim, dusty time capsule. Old tools, oil cans, yellowed newspaper stacks, boxes with labels and shaky handwriting. The air smelled like motor oil and wood shavings. I followed him to the back where a couple of boxes sat stacked next to an old workbench. He pointed at one. "That one. Just needs to go on the shelf up there." I lifted it, lighter than I expected, and slid it onto the shelf. That should have been the end of it. But then I looked around and saw the place had once been a serious workspace. Pegboard on the walls, everything labeled, old trophies up on a shelf. A photo caught my eye. black and white, framed in a simple wooden frame. It was a young couple, smiling like they didn't know the world could get hard. "That your wife?" I asked, without really thinking. He looked over, and his face changed, softened somehow. "Yeah," he said, stepping closer. "That was back in '61. We just moved into our first place." He chuckled. "Didn't know a damn thing about plumbing or taxes or keeping a lawn alive. Still doesn't stop HOA from sending letters." I laughed, and he kept going. It was like something cracked open in him. He started telling me about how he'd built most of the garage himself, me and a buddy, 2 weekends, and a lot of beer, and how he used to fix up motorcycles in here before his knees gave out. He talked about his wife, Janine, how they met at a church picnic, how she'd hated his haircut and told him so to his face, and how she'd managed to make a home out of every place they ever lived. Then he got quieter, talked about the last few years, how she'd gotten sick, slowly, the kind of illness that doesn't make a big entrance, but just quietly steals little pieces until there's nothing left to fight with. "I was her hands, toward the end," he said. "Brushed her hair, helped her eat. She'd squeeze my fingers twice whenever she wanted to say thank you." I stood there, not knowing what to say. The garage was silent, except for a low hum from a fluorescent bulb overhead. I realized I wasn't looking at just a neighbor anymore. I was looking at a man who'd lived, loved, lost, and still got up every morning to water a patchy lawn. It hit me kind of suddenly, how easy it is to walk past someone and assume you've got them figured out. Old guy, lives alone, probably bored. But people don't start as old. They get there, one story at a time. That night, back at home, I couldn't stop thinking about the garage, about the photo, about that quiet little "I was her hands" line. It got to me in a way I didn't expect. I brought it up over dinner, kind of casually at first, but then it turned into a whole thing. I told my wife about the roses, the garage, the story about Janine. She looked at me for a second and said, "So you like him now?" I laughed. I don't know if like is the word. I just see him differently. And I did. It wasn't about pity anymore. It wasn't even about guilt. It was like I'd been hit with this wave of clarity. This guy, who I used to dodge behind curtains to avoid, had a whole damn lifetime behind him. And I'd almost missed it because I was too busy being busy. That night I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about how strange it is that someone can live 20 feet from you for years and still be a complete stranger. Not just in the "we never talk" way, but in the "I never even wondered what his life might have looked like" way. I kept seeing that photo in my head, him and Janine, young and full of plans, and it made me wonder if anyone would look at my life one day and be just as clueless. I didn't suddenly decide I was going to become best friends with Mr. Fischer or start volunteering at a senior center or anything like that, but something shifted. The next morning when I saw him across the street, I waved first, not because I felt obligated, because I actually wanted to. After that day in the garage, things started to feel different, not in some big dramatic way, but in those small, quiet shifts that sneak up on you. I found myself actually looking for Mr. Fischer when I stepped outside. If I saw him messing with the hose or sitting on his porch with that old mug of his, probably filled with weak coffee or lukewarm tea, I'd cross the street and say hey. Sometimes he'd launch into a story without much prompting. Other times we'd just sit in the kind of silence that doesn't beg to be filled. One afternoon I brought over a couple of folding chairs and we sat in his backyard near the overgrown roses. He pointed at them and said, I keep meaning to clean that up. Just don't always feel like getting started." I offered to help without thinking, then immediately regretted it, because time, schedules, my own stuff. But he smiled like I'd offered him gold. We didn't do it that day, but the seed was planted. Over the next few weeks, he opened up more, and I listened. Not out of obligation anymore, but because I genuinely wanted to know more about who he was. He told me about the old neighborhood back when it was all dirt roads and everyone knew each other's names. About how he and Janine had bought their first TV on credit and watched the moon landing while eating TV dinners on the couch. He told me about the time they got lost in Colorado on a road trip and ended up sleeping in their car, laughing the whole time. Then one day, out of nowhere, he started talking about his son. I hadn't even known he had one. "Kevin," he said. "Smart kid. Loved machines. Got that from me." He paused, looked down at his hands. "Died in a car accident when he was 23. I didn't say anything. What could I say? He didn't look at me, just stared out at the yard like he was watching something I couldn't see. After that, Janine was never quite the same. And me, well, you keep going, because you have to, but it's never really the same road after that. That night, his words echoed in my head. There was this weight to his life, this depth I hadn't expected. I used to see him as a guy who talked too much about nothing. Now I saw someone who'd carried more than most people ever will, and he didn't unload it all at once. It came out in pieces, little moments, fragments of memory. Like the day he started telling me about a friend of his from work, someone he'd known 40 years. He was trying to recall the guy's name, and he just couldn't. "It's right there," he said, tapping his temple. "I can see his face, hear his laugh. But his name? Gone." And then he looked at me, and I swear I saw panic in his eyes. Real, raw fear. "This happens more now," he said quietly, "like there's a fog, and some days I can't see through it." Then his voice cracked, just slightly, and he added, "I hate it." That moment shook me. I'd never seen him like that. Not sad, not nostalgic, scared, and I didn't know what to do with that. I sat there, nodding slowly, and said the only thing that came to mind. "It's okay, happens to everyone sometimes." But it felt hollow. I went home and couldn't shake the image of him sitting in that chair, hands trembling slightly, fighting against his own brain. I talked to my wife about it. I told her, he's starting to forget things, important things. She asked if I thought it was dementia. I said I didn't know, I wasn't a doctor, but I knew something was slipping. The question that started creeping in was, how far was I willing to go with this? Because the more time I spent with him, the more attached I got, and the more I saw how little anyone else seemed to be paying attention. It wasn't that the neighbors were cruel, they were just busy, like I had been, like I still was sometimes. But suddenly, I was the one checking in, making sure his trash bins made it to the curb, picking up a few things for him when I went to the store. Nothing big, just enough to notice I was starting to organize parts of my week around his needs. And I began to feel this tension inside, between being there for him and keeping my own life on track. There were moments when I'd be late answering emails or forget to follow up on work calls because I'd spent an hour helping Mr. Fischer figure out how to restart his old TV. I started feeling guilty, not because I was helping him, but because I wasn't sure where the line was. My wife was supportive, but I caught the look on her face once when I bailed on dinner plans because Mr. Fischer had locked himself out. I said, it was just this once, but I didn't totally believe it. I wasn't sure if I was being kind or if I was starting to take on more than I could handle. And I kept asking myself, where does neighborly kindness end and personal sacrifice begin? Was I supposed to keep stepping in like this? Was I slowly becoming his, what? Caregiver? Surrogate son? Friend? That word felt both too simple and too heavy. I liked him, I cared about him. But I also had a life. I had things I was trying to build. And still, whenever I thought about stepping back, just a little, I'd remember the look on his face when he couldn't remember his friend's name. And I'd feel that familiar tug again, like it wasn't just about him anymore. Like it was also about the kind of person I wanted to be. It had been a few days since I'd seen him. At first I figured he was just tired or maybe visiting his niece. He mentioned her once in passing, said she lived 2 towns over. But by day 4, something felt off. His blinds were still drawn, his mailbox hadn't been emptied, and I hadn't heard the familiar creak of his screen door. On the 5th morning, I walked over and rang the bell. No answer. I stood there for a minute, feeling that cold weight in my chest. I walked around the side and peered through the backyard fence. The roses looked even more wild than usual, stretching out like they'd given up waiting. Something told me to try the back door. It was locked, and I didn't feel right about breaking in, so I went back home and called the non-emergency line. I gave them his name, his address, said I was a neighbor, that I was worried. They thanked me and sent someone over within the hour. I watched from my porch as the paramedics arrived. One of them went in with a key from the little lockbox by the door. I didn't even know he had one, and the other stood out front with a clipboard. I stayed on my steps. I don't know why. Maybe I already knew. A few minutes later, the one with the clipboard gave a small nod to the other. No sirens. No rush. Just stillness. That was it. He'd passed sometime in the night. Quiet. Alone. They said it looked peaceful. He was in bed. Nothing out of place. I remember just sitting there for a while after they left, staring across the street, like if I looked long enough, something would move. But the house was still. Later that afternoon, an officer came over and asked if I was listed as an emergency contact. I wasn't. Nobody was. I gave them my number anyway, in case they needed someone to unlock the side gate or let a relative in. I didn't even know who to expect. The next day, someone from the county came by to handle the initial probate stuff. They let me know that Walt had left a will. Nothing fancy, no property to divide, just instructions. I wasn't listed as a beneficiary, but they said there was a sealed letter for me that he'd included with his papers. I picked it up a few days later. It wasn't dramatic or long. Just a few pages, handwritten, a little shaky but clear. He told me about how the last 10 years had felt like slow motion fading. About how some days he wouldn't talk to anyone at all. About how he'd learned to let silence stretch around him like a coat. Then you started saying hi, he wrote. And I remembered I was still here. That line stuck with me. I remembered I was still here. I think I sat in my car in the parking lot for almost an hour after reading it. Just holding that letter, letting it settle. That weekend, I helped coordinate with a small local service. No big ceremony. Walt hadn't wanted that. Just a simple memorial at the community center. A few neighbors came, mostly older folks who hadn't spoken to him in years but remembered him from block parties and lawn committee meetings. One guy brought an old photo of Walt fixing a lawnmower in the 80s. Another lady said, he used to tell the worst jokes at our potlucks. We all laughed. And cried, a little. It wasn't a huge turnout. But it was enough. A few weeks later, I found myself back in his backyard. The roses had started to dry out. I brought over gloves and some shears and started trimming them back. I didn't know what I was doing, not really, but it felt like something that needed to be done, like a small promise I hadn't realized I'd made. As I worked, I thought about how it had all started, just an awkward, too-long chat by the mailbox, and how that had turned into something real, something that mattered, not because I did anything heroic, but because I didn't look away. In the end, I think that's what he needed. Not someone to fix his life or rescue him from anything, just someone to stand beside him and listen. I used to think being a good person meant doing big things, making big changes. But Walt showed me that sometimes it's the smallest things that mean the most. A wave across the street, 5 minutes on the porch, remembering someone's story, not brushing past it, just staying long enough for them to feel like they still matter. I still don't think I did anything special. I just showed up. And somehow, that was enough.